Dream machine. DICOM HL7 IHE and snap. We're building the future, never looking back.
If you've worked anywhere near medical imaging, you've benefited from DICOM. Even if you've never touched it directly, you've benefited from this mature standard. In this episode of Imaging Informatics Unplugged, I sit down with John Hally to talk about something that quietly powers a huge part of our industry. That's the DICOM Toolkit. John is a product leader for cloud and technical platforms at Merge with more than 15 years of hands-on imaging experience and over a decade in product leadership. He's responsible for global strategy across Merge VNA, DICOM and HL7 Toolkits, cloud platforms, and digital pathology. And if you've ever wondered who actually keeps DICOM working as the industry evolves, this conversation pulls back that curtain. We talk about why so many new vendors, especially AI companies, underestimate the complexity of DICOM. And we look at what point do they suddenly realize they need a toolkit instead of rolling their own implementation. We get into what a DICOM toolkit really does, why the standard is never done, and how cloud, ARM processors, containerized deployments, and modern development stacks are changing expectations at the lowest levels. We also explore adoption outside of radiology. We look at digital pathology, ophthalmology, scope video, and enterprise imaging use cases that are forcing long overdue standardization across these different service lines. And yes, we also touch on HT-J2K, high throughput JPEG 2000. We look at why it matters, how progressive lossless rendering fits into massive data sets like pathology, and why staying current with the transfer syntaxes is no longer optional. This is one of those episodes where you realize how much of imaging works precisely because we don't notice it. Now, before we dive in, make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss future episodes, and keep an eye on nagelsconsulting.com. We've got some genuinely exciting new courses coming soon, especially for people who want to understand imaging standards, toolkits, and enterprise imaging workflows at a much deeper level. With all that said, let's jump into it. Okay, well, welcome, John. I'm really happy to have you on this episode in season 2 of Imaging Informatics Unplugged. And I think this is going to be a fun conversation. So we're going to talk a bit about the DICOM toolkit. We see an opportunity now that is laying out in the industry where there's a lot of newcomers in the market that are showing up. So there's newologies, there's AI companies. And for a lot of these organizations, they're dipping their toes into DICOM for the first time. So we're going to have this conversation about the importance of DICOM, what a toolkit really does. I'm curious if you could just start by setting the table with who is Merge, that's your employer, and what is the history in DICOM? So that can kind of set the table with why we're having this conversation with you.
Yeah, thank you, Jason, and Happy New Year. Glad to be on the podcast. Longtime follower and admirer. So, as far as Merge, so we started in 1987 in a basement of our founder's house in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And his whole drive to starting the company was the interoperability between different scanning vendors. You have your GE scanners, your Siemens scanners, CT, MRI, X-rays, etc. But they were all very proprietary. They didn't talk to one another. Everything was analog. So, digital was kind of just starting around then. So he was really looking at how do I create the plumbing between all these things for interoperability? And it really started with, what we called the Merge box, which was taking analog modalities and making them communicate digitally through a dial-up modem phone line, and making them DICOM. So during this time as well, he was a proponent for the DICOM standard. We were a co-founder of that with DICOM V2, and then V3 came out, which is obviously what is still predominantly used across the industry. And these Merge boxes, when I started working at Merge in 2010, those were one of the products that I still supported. So as these modalities went all digital, they started shipping them and selling them around the world. And these Merge boxes continued to go with them. So we would get calls from all sorts of places and saying, hey, how do I make this work with my network and those sort of things. Pretty cool as far as, the foundings of the company really based off of standards-based interoperability. And then in 1994, coming out of the Merge box was our DICOM Toolkit. So really being able to have, this piece of low-level code software be embedded into medical devices, whether those be the scanners themselves or different software companies with, kind of PAX 1.0, in the mid 90s there. And, it's been, over 30 years now, and we are still a predominant player in the industry, toolkit perspective.
Thanks for setting the table. So 87 company starts. And so that mid 80s point is really the crucial point where ACR and NEMA are going to team up, and they are going to help establish what we now know as DICOM. And I think we often take for granted how valuable that is, and the fact that those challenges of a vendor coming into a healthcare enterprise and selling them the scanner and then saying, we'll digitize this workflow, but it's only going to work there, and it's not going to work at the MRI. That's another vendor down the hallway. And so we don't experience those as much because we have this very rich, mature standard, DICOM. And as I had alluded to before, we have a lot of opportunity for growth and adoption of DICOM when we think of other ologies and new companies that are coming in, seeing opportunities for workflows and AI. So when these vendors start dipping their toe in the imaging world, from your experience, when do they typically realize that they may need to look at having a dedicated DICOM toolkit instead of trying to just build out DICOM support themselves?
Yeah, I think it varies for product to product, device to device, as far as the problem statement in front of them, as far as what is DICOM? What do I need to do this? Do I not need to do this? Do I start proprietary, as some service lines have, and then maybe grow into DICOM in the future where the market more demands it? But I think, one of the things that is very challenging to customers of, our toolkit and why they've gone with us is DICOM is not a one and done standard. Each year there are hundreds of updates to it, whether they are change proposals or whole new SOP classes that are being supported. And as you look at your device, knowing that, especially if you're in an emerging market, those changes are pretty rampant and pretty, impactful. So those sort of things, as far as, how much expertise do I have in-house on DICOM? Am I hiring people from the radiology and cardiology space who've been doing this for 20, 30 years? Or, am I looking to really build that knowledge within my own team and the skill sets of my particular segment? So I think understanding DICOM and then the rapidness of that change is one of those things that people look at and say, okay, maybe I don't want to deal with all those updates and all those code changes. I'm looking to a DICOM toolkit, whether it's open source or commercial, to help alleviate those pains.
And so when someone goes down the process of deciding that they want a toolkit, they make the selection, they purchase the toolkit, or they use an open source one, what would you speak as far as kind of the on-ramping period for those that are maybe new to imaging and not as familiar with the standard as a whole? What does it look like as far as them getting familiar with that? And is that something that you provide right now as far as additional support to help with that on-ramp?
Yeah, no, for sure. And it's kind of one of those things of, where do you start, right? What are these, whether it's DIMSY with DICOM C fines, or maybe you're jumping right into DICOM Web with, more modern approach to things. But you got to think about, again, that interoperability of, hey, DICOM Web is not 100% adopted across all sorts of things you interact with. Maybe you need to start with DIMSY. Which is conversations I've had with some of those vendors like digital pathology, right? Who've been doing digital things for, 20 years, 15 years, but have done it in a proprietary way that I kind of look back on as the sins of PAX, right? from the 80s where, things aren't as interoperable, and they've made, some strides as far as all the different proprietary formats that they all talk. But looking at DICOM and how it really all comes together is where the building, your own expertise, and then looking at with that DICOM toolkit, how do I find those answers? Am I going to an open source community where maybe someone will answer me out of the goodness of their heart? Or do I go to a commercial option like Merge, which has, 24/7 support, developer to developer support. So you're talking to someone who's been a developer for, 20, 30 years, who's lived DICOM and all the implementations in different ways. Things can happen or can go wrong because, as we know, just because you do DICOM doesn't mean you're following the standard to a T.
It's also the opportunity where, you're not following the standard to a T, or having the usefulness of expertise is nice to lean on when the standard can be written in a certain way in which two vendors can interpret it completely different. It's like arguing about the ending of Inception or something like that. So you have just completely different takes, and it's nice to have, the perspective of the experts being able to weigh in on that.
Mm-hmm.
You touched a little bit on digital pathology, and I agree wholeheartedly. It's as if they are about 30 years behind where radiology is. They're making strides, and there's Working Group 26. There's been a lot of effort related to proving that there is value in going down this path. But we still see resistance when it comes to, the overall market share. What has been your experience outside of digital path when we think of other areas like ophthalmology and gastro and other specialties?
Yeah, also, wearing my enterprise imaging hat, being also over our vendor neutral archive, it's been, really amazing to see over the last 10 years, even some of these other service lines, I would call them, really entering into the true enterprise imaging space, supporting DICOM natively. So like scope videos, for instance, whether they're, ENT or gastro, etc. A lot of those started as just MP4 videos and PNGs and whatnot. And, as the market really demanded, I don't want these silos, of these proprietary PACS systems, right, for these different departmental solutions. I want to bring them into my vendor neutral archive. I want to, bring them in with my electronic health record and image enable those things so that, the care teams across an enterprise can really unlock and see what's inside those different departments, because just because you're doing something, an ENT doesn't mean neuro or the ED team or other people don't find value in seeing that patient's whole story. So I think scope videos was one of them that kind of, hey, there's a lot of information there, cancer, oncology, other things that I really forced some of those vendors to go DICOM so that you could bring it into an enterprise view versus a departmental. And, I think we're starting to see that from the digital pathology side, but I think they have their own market challenges as well around adoption and reimbursement. But ophthalmology, kind of has fallen after the scope videos where, again, all the fundus images and then all the different pictures of your eye. Again, very much, JPEG, PNG, proprietary formats, but they have like CTs and things like that where, having that interoperability, being able to view that not only in an ophthalmology PACS, but also in a radiology PACS has forced that DICOM conversation. We're seeing, a lot more adoption, natively from those scanners as well.
Terrific. So, I'm going to go back a little bit because there's probably a question I could have set the stage with after asking about Merge. But for those that are listening that may find this very fascinating, they've heard about DICOM toolkits as maybe like within their role as a PACS admin, they haven't interacted too heavily with them. How would you just describe the role that this is playing within the solution itself, beyond just the basic file management or network handling? Like, what would be the a real convincing point of the pitch to understand why someone would go down this path.
Yeah, I mean, so the DICOM toolkit itself, it's not an application. So this is really geared towards developers, vendors, B2B type of business, people who are building products. Also, from a provider perspective, people who are doing research and creating their own tools, whether they have their own AI that they're working on or anonymization things. This is where, that developer focus of the DICOM toolkit gives you the ability to take advantage of the full standard. So not only from a communication perspective, again, whether it's DMZ based, CFind, CMoves, CStores, or DICOM Web with Keto, Watto, Stowe, being able to have that communication side of things, as well as being able to actually create those DICOM images, do that in memory, doing that. Maybe you're, storing them to file, which is maybe a little bit of an older school way, but giving you that flexibility of calling upon this package of all the things that, happens within the DICOM system, and then having your application and services be able to not have to worry about those sort of things. So as far as DICOM itself, you can have it be very stringent based on the standard. You can relax it in certain areas. You can support, obviously, certain transfer syntaxes, SOP classes. So it's all very customizable, but it also teaches you when, hey, if I'm going to use this type 2 tag, there may be a type 3 tag or multiple type 3 tags that per the standard, because you put metadata in this one, you should be filling out these ones as well to give you, again, a more DICOM compliant piece of file or the communication of that as well, right? If you're not the creator of the DICOM and the images, but actually maybe more of a consumer, maybe you're a viewer, and those sort of things, being able to understand what are those pieces of information in DICOM that are critical to interpolate. Obviously, you have your type 1 tags, which, hey, what is this? You need to, what type of image, who's the patient, accession numbers, all those sort of things. But some of those type 2 tags are really, really important as far as how do you display this? How do you measure on these sort of things? Pixel spacing and interpolations and those sort of things.
That's a great answer. Thank you very much. And you had mentioned a little bit about open source. So there's commercial toolkits. I had the advantage of being able to call support with a commercial toolkit. And open source options can be a bit challenging where I'm relying on community message boards or whatnot. What would be another kind of factors that would influence someone going down a certain path? Obviously, budget would be one, but do you have any thoughts around what would be those differentiators that might sway one to go in either direction?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's what are you building, right? Are you building a medical device, class 2, class 3 device, where you're looking for something that not only is developed in a quality management type system, ISO certifications, those sort of things, but also are you doing something that is a critical piece within the puzzle? This is a little AI project or something like that where you just want to see if this can work. Open source is a great way to go and see if you can work. But if you need something that can scale and perform, where speed is going to be a real factor and how big is your application footprint and those sort of things. And that's another where, commercial may make more sense from your perspective. The other thing, obviously, support, as you mentioned. Not only, can I pick up the phone? Can I send an email? Can I get a quick answer with someone who's, deep expertise, but also the support of the standard. Where within the DICOM realm am I working in, right? Is this something that is rapidly evolving where I need to rely on the fact that this community, if it's open source, is on top of these sort of things and that they are continuing to stay on top of it? Or, from a commercial perspective where, hey, we do two, one in the beginning of the year, one in the middle of the year. We will have every single standard update within one of those 2 releases, and as needed, right? If there's critical issues, we can always do another release.
I'm curious, are you familiar with how that compares against like the release cycle of pick an open source one that's out there. How does that compare? Are they roughly doing a similar 2 releases or on demand?
It's kind of across the board. I mean, some of them have more structure to their release cycles as far as when they kind of deliver and cut the code. Some of those might just be yearly. Others might be more frequently, maybe more of a quarterly basis. But again, those things are sourced, right, from the open source community. So it's not like they have a directive or a roadmap to say, we're going to do all the DICOM stuff, or we're going to, do the new coding platform for .NET 10 or whatever, and it's going to be delivered on this date, right? It's just kind of at the will of the open source community, who can get to it, who has time on the side, and is there a real push from a large amount of users? You may be in a very narrow area of DICOM that's changing rapidly, but the open source community is more focused on radiology or whatever, which they don't care as much about.
Okay, thank you very much for that response. What I'm interested is, over the past, say, 10 to 15 years, we've seen a huge evolution in a lot of aspects to imaging. Now, cloud native is assumed. We see mobile options. A lot of AI companies have come in, and there's AI-driven workflow. How have these these areas and the vendors that support those areas, how have that changed the expectations for what the DICOM toolkit is doing today?
Yeah, no, Jason, it's definitely an evolving landscape. And one of the things being a lower level toolkit, there's a lot of cool things happening on the application levels with AI and large language models and, cloud and all these sort of things. But from a toolkit perspective, what that comes down to is there's a lot more development environments and a lot of different coding languages that we need to support. So with our Merge DICOM toolkit, we're over 30 different toolkit packages, everything from your C++, from 30 years ago when we started, to Java and .NET, and how .NET has continued to evolve with yearly releases, also to not only be for Windows, but be for Linux as well. And then you have things like chipsets, where you have, your traditional x86, so your Intel processors and all those sort of things. But now you have, what started in mobile as these ARM chips. So we support Android and iOS and these ARM chips, as well as the M1 chips and the Mac OSs. All these need to be compiled differently. And then being able to support these things not only for on-prem, but cloud as well. So as you look at cloud, one of the big things that has come over the last year or two, ARM chips are no longer just in my mobile device.
Mm-hmm.
They are on my personal computer. I have a Snapdragon ARM chip. And there were some compatibilities issues in the very beginning, but, people started to support their software for ARM chips on your PC. But now cloud, these ARM chips in cloud, you have the same sort of server type for x86, Intel, whatever, AMD. And now you have these ARM chips where the cost for these things is lower.
Mm-hmm.
So as you look at, from a DICOM toolkit perspective, we have customers saying, hey, I'm in cloud, I'm all in cloud, maybe I'm a new product or whatever. These ARM chips are cheaper. I can get a better bang for the buck, the same sort of performance as the other things at a cheaper price. And cloud is, you pay for what you use, right? Every minute of a CPU, costs money, especially as in this containerized world. And that's where, being cloud native as well, that was one of the drivers for .NET to go from your traditional Windows to .NET Core. And now everything is a new .NET release every year because the landscape is evolving so much. From an AI perspective, a lot of platforms for AI are Python. So it's really looking at, what is my software? What is maybe my portfolio of software? And am I going to be with a company that is staying on top of technology, never mind just the DICOM standard, which can be daunting on its own?
Thank you very much for that. And I guess as we've seen a lot of modernization with opportunities, we've seen the standard keeping up with the times. And there was a lot of excitement when we saw the high throughput JPEG 2000 lossless compression. So HG2K. Could you just share a little bit about that particular and how it fits in that particular transfer syntax and the opportunity of how it fits in with the toolkit?
Yeah, HTJ2K is a very exciting, I guess, development in the larger industry. So this obviously came out of the JPEG world of things and all their different compressions. But what it allows is for progressive rendering at diagnostic quality. So being able to look at a particular image in medical imaging and being able to stream that so that you have more and more resolution in a lossless format. And DICOM added support for that maybe a year and a half or something like that ago. There was a big push from the industry saying, hey, this is out there. This makes a ton of sense for medical imaging. DICOM, can you support it? So now there's a whole new transfer syntax to support that. And a lot of companies are taking advantage of that. And that's one of the things where staying up with the DICOM standard, we tackled that problem as well within our toolkit to make sure when that standard came out as a new transfer syntax that we supported it for not only, the industry, but, selfishly for ourselves as well.
Yeah, and as we see the opportunity of bigger and bigger data, pathology, and being able to use high throughput JPEG 2000 and making sure that you're up to date on this. So adoption is going to be very important. I think this is not going to be one of those areas where the vendors are going to wait for the customers. I think the vendors are going to start acting very quickly because they will understand the value. See, again, the toolkit being up to speed with what we're doing here, because it hasn't, that is not a transfer syntax that has been around for very long.
No, and especially when you talk about digital pathology, I mean, those slides are 2, 4, 10, 20 gigabytes in size. So not only is that driving cloud, but that's driving a different way of how do you look at all those different magnification levels and how do you progressively render that all from one file. So that's definitely a huge advancement and push for the industry.
Terrific. So I've had a great conversation. I think we could go on for a little bit longer, but I'm going to let you sign off with just some final thoughts about DICOM, the standard, the toolkit, and where you see the future going.
Yeah, no, thank you very much, Jason, for the time here. So, Merge DICOM Toolkit, you have it in your hospital system. You don't know it. It's in a vast majority of radiology and cardiology modalities, softwares, etc. We have been doing this for 30 years and we'll continue to do it for another 30 years because DICOM as we know it is not going away. It's going to continue to evolve rapidly, especially in these changing times. And we have been experts in DICOM and will continue to drive the standard forward.
I like that it's in your hospital. You just don't know it. That's when you know standards are working really well. Thank you, John. Maybe we can do this again some other time. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Jason.
DICOM, HL7, IHE, and Snap. We're building the future, never looking back.